evening to Douglass Week. We've already had some wonderful events. We're only on day 2, so we're here with Douglass Week until Sunday. So do check out the other events that we have on our website, www.douglasincork.com. We're here on Zoom tonight, and we're also streaming live over on YouTube. So hello to all our YouTube attendees. And we're really delighted to welcome you to this wide-ranging celebration of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass's visit to Ireland. And it's difficult to believe that only 1 year ago, this was sort of conceived of as a one-day symposium, and how it's grown and how amazing it is to see all your faces on the screen tonight and see the reach of Douglass Week and how it's really just, spread out, and the web has been just spread wider and wider. So thank you all for being here. I just want to note a few things in terms of housekeeping before we begin. So there will be a Q&A function here, and the way that this will work with this session is questions will be sort of relayed to the panelists as we go throughout the evening. So there won't be a Q&A at the end. We'll just answer questions as we go along. So if you interact with the Q&A function, then our team will monitor that closely, and we'll pass on the questions to our panelists, and they'll try their best to get to them. Should you have any more specific questions for our organizing team, you can email us directly at info@douglasincork.com, and someone will get back to you as soon as possible. And for your information, this event and all events throughout Douglass Week will be recorded and available for viewing in the coming days. And as I say, don't forget to check out our website. There's loads of other great events, as well as a number of unscheduled events too, that you can watch on the website. So without further ado, it's my real pleasure tonight to introduce this session, and I'm going to pass over to Kristen Leary from Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, and a core member of the Douglass Week team, who is going to introduce Dr. Caroline Schroeder and Rex Doherty as well. So thank you so much, Kristen. I'll pass on to you now.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone for tuning in as you come in, and thanks very much to our panelists and everyone else who's participated in Douglass Week events so far, and we look forward to welcoming you to many more throughout the course of this week. But for tonight, we have 2 fabulous co-hosts, so I won't talk for too long except to tell you a little bit about Rex and Caroline. First off, Rex is from my neck of the woods. He is a Washington, D.C. based theater artist and currently serves as artistic director of Solas Nua, which is well known in the DC area as an award-winning contemporary Irish arts organization. He's originally from Oklahoma City, and I'll read this, Rex. Both of Rex's parents grew up on farms and taught him the value of hard work and good company. But Rex has been in DC for the past 13 or so years, and has a wife, Lee, and a son, Beckett, who we may see tonight, since I understand he likes to crash Zoom meetings. So be on the lookout for that. During the 5 years Rex has been artistic director of Solas Nua, he's garnered international acclaim for his productions. He's earned multiple Helen Hayes Awards and nominations. And as I know very well in the DC area, Irish American community knows well, he's provided the company with steady artistic and financial growth. So we're grateful for that programming in the DC area. I'd say Rex was a producer of the Frederick Douglass Ireland project, which was staged in quite a unique setting on the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C., and hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that tonight. But he also has some acclaim as an actor himself. I can state from firsthand knowledge. He had a one-man show called The Smuggler, which was listed by the New York Times as one of the best theater productions of the year nationwide, and I think that was in 2019. Rex can correct me, but I will note on that close on Rex that he can do a brilliant Irish brogue and can play a brilliant Irish rogue. So I'll just put that pin right there for him, for you, Rex, and and. Our other co-host is a core, excuse me, a core member of the Douglass Week team, a tireless leader through everything Douglass Week, Dr. Caroline Schroeder, who is a university language teacher at University College Cork. She was awarded her PhD in American Studies and Film from UCC, and she's dedicated her research and teaching to engaging students with the cinematic representation of slavery, racism, and stereotyping, and making North American slavery on page and screen accessible to students and visible and understandable to all. So very pertinent to what we'll be discussing tonight. I'll say too that Caroline's work explores the foundations of modern day systematic racism and follows the political, cultural, and social developments and civil rights movements. And she's been involved in a variety of diversity and inclusion efforts. And I'd say at the top of the list of those these days is Douglass Week. So thanks, Caroline and Rex, and I'll hand it off to you for a fantastic evening of talks and performances.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you, Rex. Thank you, Sarah. Good evening to everyone tonight, and good morning to Ken and Roger, who are joining us from California. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this conversation about diversity on stage and on screen. And it's my great honor and my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to our wonderful speakers, Kenneth B Morris Jr, Roger Guenveur Smith, and Paul Oakley Stovall. And in no way will I be able to do justice to all of the great work that these three panelists have done with this little introduction. So just briefly from me, and I will leave it to Roger and Ken and Paul to share more with us during the evening. So let me introduce you first to the outstanding and incredibly kind Kenneth B Morris Jr. Ken descends from two of the most influential influential names in American history. He's the great grandson of Frederick Douglass himself, and he is the great grandson of Booker T. Washington. And Ken continues his family's legacy of anti-slavery and educational work as a co-founder and the president of the Rochester, New York-based nonprofit Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. And among the many things that Ken does, he sits on the board of directors of the Frederick Douglass Ireland project, and he serves as a board president at the Young Americans Performing Arts organization, and he is a former ambassador for the nonprofit organization Human Rights First. And Ken, I know, has a great interest also in audiovisual representation and theatrical performance and creative arts. So welcome to the show, Ken. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Caroline. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. And our second guest is the esteemed Roger Guenveur Smith. Roger is an internationally acclaimed actor, a writer, a director who has created a very prolific body of work on stage and on screen. Roger has adapted his Obie Award-winning solo performance of a Huey P. Newton story into a Peabody Award-winning telefilm, which you can catch on Hulu, I believe, currently. And you can watch his Bessie Award-winning Rodney King on Netflix. So lots to check out afterwards. And his work on screen includes projects inspired by Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Nat Turner, which I know very well, Madame C.J. Walker, and Roger has also devised a very wide range of theatrical studies of Frederick Douglass, and I'm sure we'll talk about that tonight, Roger. Also Christopher Columbus, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, and so many more. So a very warm welcome to the show, Roger. Thank you so much for being with us. And last but not least, our third speaker is the wonderful Paul Oakley Stovall. And Paul is also a critically acclaimed writer and actor. He currently plays George Washington in the national tour of Hamilton, an American musical. And Paul has been involved in so many wonderful projects around the world. And one of them is when COVID-19 shut the Hamilton tour down, Paul came to Ireland. So we're very happy about that. And he came here to research Douglass's visit to Ireland and to write a TV show about Frederick Douglass's life and his journeys. He's also working on a musical called Clear, which was selected at the Eugene O'Neill National Musical Theatre Conference. And he's also in pre-production for his next 2 films, Wolf in Waiting and Great Neck, and he'll both be co-starring with Danilo Carrera. So welcome Ken and Roger and Paul, and thank you so much for being here with us. And I hand over to Rex, I believe, for the first question.
Yeah, again, it's just so great to be with everybody, and just just from the introductions of you three alone, the read list and the watch list of Works Cited is already a great reading list, and watch list. So thank you so much for sharing the space with us. I wondered if we just would kick off with a sort of a conversation about, what connected you to Frederick Douglass. Some of it is academic, some of it is artistic for Ken, some of it's very personal, of course. But, as we're celebrating Frederick Douglass and Douglass Week in so many fantastic ways this week and beyond, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background on stage screen in connection to Douglass. And maybe even particularly, why don't we start with Paul, since you're currently in Ireland working on a new project. And just, how did you find your way to Douglass? What drew you to him, other than his, he's such a storied and celebrated figure, but maybe particularly with the Irish connection?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say, after those other 2 introductions, I'm slumming it, and I'm just happy to be in the room. So thanks, Ken. Thanks, Roger. Roger, I've known your work for so long. We briefly connected years ago, and you probably don't even remember, but I've been a big fan for a very long time. So let me get that out of the way. Okay. So as Caroline said, when Hamilton was shut down, our tour was in Miami, and the next city was Jacksonville. So I went ahead and quarantined in Jacksonville, and I came across this Black community theater company called Players by the Sea. They were struggling, with this new COVID thing. And we just, we started chopping it up, and they said, "Hey, we saw you're a playwright. Would you mentor some young writers?" I said, "Sure." They said, "We'll do it on Zoom. It's all good." And one of the other mentors was a woman who lives in County Wicklow named Nadia Ramutar. Now, this is how Frederick works. She started Googling me on the side, and then wrote me on the side and said, "Hey, I see that you are, I look at the type of things that you write, and I wonder if you know about Frederick Douglass." And, I puffed up like, I'm a college educated Black man. I know everything about Frederick Douglass. I read the autobiography. That's it, right? She was like, "Oh yeah, so did you know he went to Ireland?" I said, "No, what do you mean? You know why he went to Ireland?" And all she had to do was, drop a few breadcrumbs, and I was hooked. And that's how, so I knew about Frederick, or at least so I thought, but I didn't understand this pocket of time in his life. And being the type of writer that started in acting, I'm not a real, I can get into the research, but I want to go there and walk in the footsteps. So I slid into Ireland before the lockdown got to level 5. And here I am. And I've been, as I was preparing, I started getting emails from people who said, "Oh, I heard you're going to Ireland. You need to know Caroline. I heard you're going to Ireland. You need to meet Kristen Leary. You need to," and that's how I found out about Douglass Week. So Frederick he just kept on working on me.
So great. And Roger, you're also working on an artistic project as well. How did you find your way into that aspect?
Well, great to be in contact with you all. Congratulations. I've been tuned in since 6 a.m. Los Angeles time yesterday and today, and it's an extraordinary gathering. And my only regret is that we aren't able to do it in person, but you're pulling it off electronically and beautifully with passion and with nuance. And I really congratulate you on doing this. Another regret is that it's not happening on this side of the Atlantic, but sometimes it's like that. And I appreciate the Irish initiative. I was very fortunate in that my parents had Douglass's narrative in our small home library. And it was probably one of the first serious books that I ever read. And I'm sure that I didn't know all the words in the narrative, but it made an impression on me. And when I was looking to do a senior honors project in American Studies at Occidental College, where our 44th President of the United States spent a couple of years, I thought, why not a solo performance, which incorporates my interest in history, in biography, and my interest in theater. I had, as a child, been exposed to a solo performance entitled Mark Twain Tonight. And last week, we just lost the great Hal Holbrook, who, as an undergraduate, started work on Mark Twain and did that work throughout the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, up until just a few years ago. And I took my daughter to see him in San Diego, and he turned it out. And I wondered, how could a man reach into history and create a character that we think we know, who is speaking to us as if he is with us, who demolishes this thing called time and is able to grab our imagination and to inspire us. So senior year at Oxy, I'm in the chapel doing this thing called An Evening with Frederick Douglass, which was far too long an evening. Even my own mother said that I needed to edit. And I've been editing ever since. And I have had the opportunity of playing Douglass all over the world. And it's been a very rewarding experience. And I have continued to, I think, grow in Frederick Douglass. I used to have to put gray makeup right here, but now I don't have to do that anymore. And that's something that Holbrook, said, well, I've outlived Mark Twain now. I haven't outlived Frederick Douglass, but the journey has been an extraordinary one. Frederick Douglass now is the new rendition, ever evolving. Did a great piece in Prospect Park in Brooklyn, outdoors with the Branford Marsalis Quartet, and Branford and his ensemble played in confluence with Douglass. And afterwards, we went to a little cafe in Brooklyn to celebrate. We sat in a corner booth. We looked up on the wall behind the booth, and there's a photograph of Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, you're making me just miss the fact that we're not live all the more. But we'll just look at our background screens now with these photos of Douglass. But that's Paul or Roger. Sorry, thanks for sharing that. It sounds like you have like Hal Holbrook, a lifelong journey with Douglass, and that is so powerful. And you will continue to work on it, and it will continue to work on you. And that I do want to hear more from everyone in just a little bit about how do you make history your own, and how do you bring it down someone into a playable moment. But maybe we'll hear from Kenneth as well, who's also had a lifelong relationship with Douglass.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for doing this Douglass Week on behalf of the family of Frederick and Anna Murray Douglass. I appreciate this interest in him, and also, Paul and Roger, to be here with you this evening is a great honor for me. Roger, I've followed your work, and I know you've played more than one of my ancestors. So it's just really so emotional for me to be sitting here to talk about him. I didn't find Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass found me through the union of my grandparents on my mother's side. My grandmother, Nettie Hancock Washington, is Booker T. Washington's granddaughter. And my grandfather, Frederick Douglass III, is Frederick Douglass's great-grandson. My grandparents met in 1941 at Tuskegee Normal School and Institute, which is a school that Booker T. Washington founded in 1881 in Tuskegee, Alabama. My grandparents were on campus the same day. My grandmother had been born on campus in the hospital there, but she was living in California at the time and just happened to be home for summer vacation. My grandfather, who was a surgeon, was commissioned down there by the Veterans Administration during World War II. So they found themselves on campus the same day, rushing across to get to the other side to meet friends for my grandmother. And my grandfather was going to eat in the student cafeteria, which he never ate there. That was the first time. And they literally bumped into each other. I didn't know that the other descended from an historic family, and they fell in love at first sight and wound up getting married 3 months later. And so when my mom, Nettie Washington Douglass, was born, she was the product of that union, and she was an only child. So I have the honor and privilege of being the first male to carry the dual lineage. You know, you talk about the photographs that are behind us. You know, I just have to tell you a quick story. I spent all of my summers at Frederick Douglass's summer beach house on the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. It was built by my great-great-grandfather, Charles, who was the youngest son of Frederick and Anna. And he built the home for his father as a retirement home. And he asked his dad, he said, "Are there any special features that you want in the house?" And Frederick said, "Yes, I want there to be a tower at the top, and I want it to point in a certain direction." And what he wanted to do at the end of his life was to sit in that tower and look back across the Chesapeake Bay, back across the water, because on the other side you can see land. And that land is the eastern shore of Maryland, where he had been born into slavery and where he had toiled away in chains. And so here was Frederick, who had accomplished so much in his life over a 50-year public career, that he never wanted to forget where he came from, even though he'd been born into this horrific institution of slavery. But in that house, there were images of my ancestors everywhere. And I remember there was this larger than life portrait of Frederick Douglass at the top of the stairs. And I was about 5 or 6 years old. And one night I was looking at it and I thought, "Man, you look mean. And I'm glad I didn't know you." And as I tried to sneak past that portrait, his eyes would follow me. And by the time I would get down to the end of the hallway, I could feel that steely, fiery glare burning like fire on the back of my neck. And I always imagined in my little boy imagination, this booming baritone voice bellowing down on me and saying, "You will do great things, young man." I said, "Who, me?" You know, that was a lot of pressure. I didn't know at that time that he was the most photographed American of the 19th century. And he was very deliberate in the way that he presented himself through photography. And he said, "When you look at a picture of me, you're never going to deny that I'm a man worthy of freedom, worthy of citizenship. And you're never going to see in my face a happy, amiable fugitive slave." So it took me a while to learn why he was looking at me that way, but I would have to do history book reports, and I'd open the family encyclopedia Britannica, and there was the great abolitionist staring back at me. He was always watching, always staring. So it's an honor to have his blood flowing through my veins. With regard to Ireland, I found out from Kristen Leary in 2011, there was a project to unveil a Frederick Douglass monument in Ireland ahead of President Obama's 2012 trip. And I had read the narrative, of course, several times, but never really made that connection other than knowing that the reason that he had to flee to Ireland in the first place was because of the publication of that first autobiography, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. He wrote it when he was 27 years old, having never spent one day of his life in a classroom. He writes this classic piece of literature that is still impacting the lives of people all over the world. And the notoriety of that best-selling book threatened his freedom because he was what we would have called at that time a fugitive slave. So he would have to flee to Ireland and England and Scotland as a cooling off period. So that's how I connected to the Douglass story in Ireland.
That is just, I've talked to you guys so much in the last couple of months, and I am still in awe. Just there's so much in there, and I'm so glad we're getting to talk about all of this. Thank you so much, Paul and Roger and Ken. I'm just like, the synapses are blowing up in my head, and Ken, I'm just thinking about, especially when you were talking there about sort of the representation through media and, photography and history and, representation, on stage, on screen, through photography, but also, remembering where we're coming from, remembering the past. And I was thinking, we've had these conversations in the last couple of weeks. I've been talking to each of you, and I was thinking, and because we had talked about sort of the portrayal of, these major historical figures on, on stage, on screen, but also performing Blackness, performing Whiteness, and also capturing history, right? Capturing this history of these really great people like Frederick Douglass. And I'm just, thinking that capturing history can be challenging. Capturing, these historical figures can be, challenging at times. And I'm just kind of wondering that now that we're talking, can you guys maybe tell us a little bit about the sort of inspiration and the experience with performing Blackness, performing Whiteness, performing history, seeing history performed from your very individual perspectives? And maybe, Roger, do you want to go first, and then Paul, and then Ken?
Sure. Also, in my family's home library was a 2-volume book called The World's Great Men of Color. And it was edited by a gentleman by the name of J.A. Rogers, who was a self-educated historian who worked as a Pullman porter. And in this 2-volume set, there were portraits of men throughout history who were men of color, some who had not been recognized as men of color. And there were brief biographical sketches of these men. And this really struck my imagination. And Paul, one of the gentlemen in the 2-volume set, was Alexander Hamilton. And when you all started that work on Hamilton, my brain went right back to J.A. Rogers, because I had always recognized Hamilton as a man of color. And lo and behold, here he is reimagined as a man of color, as is George Washington and Burr and what have you. And my response to that is yes, of course, because this is the little boy, the Roger Dodger, who initially imagined all of these people in his own image. And this, I think, is the struggle that we have on stage and on screen, because we recognize the power of the imagination, particularly the imagination of the child. We have engaged historical characters for eons. You can go back to Agamemnon. You can go to Richard III, all the way up to Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, where we have imagined historical characters in a creative, hopefully effective way. And this is part of the great human storytelling tradition. And we have found new, inventive ways of telling those stories. Have been great successes, and much more success to come. I am extraordinarily pleased to be here in conversation with these two other gentlemen, Paul and Ken. Thank you so much for your contributions thus far and your contributions to come. What you have done through your commitment, not only through the arts, but also through your activism, is in the absolute tradition of Frederick and Anna Murray Douglass.
Yes, thank you, Roger. I'm struck by you bringing up Alexander Hamilton, and I'm going to use it as seamless as a segue as I can, because it has always surprised me that people don't bring that up when they say, oh, Lin-Manuel has cast people of color in these white history, and we say it in the show. Somebody called him a Creole bastard. We say right in the beginning where his mother was from and where his father was from and what island he was from. But we somehow just move past that and say, oh yeah, all the founding fathers were white, when we all know better. We all know the mixing and things that were going on. But so that brings me to playing George Washington, and it brings me to Caroline's question about the performance of Blackness and Whiteness. And as Hamilton travels across our country, there are cities we go to where it isn't given a second thought because people feel so modern and liberal and left, and they think, oh, it's such a cool idea. And then there are places we go on tour where people will come right up to me and say, you shouldn't be doing that because a Black person should not be. And and I've realized over time, it's less about them saying a Black person shouldn't be playing George Washington. It's that for them, a Black person shouldn't be in that position of leadership. They shouldn't have to imagine that. So while I enjoy playing Hamilton, or while I enjoy playing Washington in Hamilton, and I think it's a wonderful show, it's doing wonderful things, it's encouraging young children to imagine themselves in different ways. I want to kind of shift to Ken and remind him of something he said to me when I was presenting to him my idea for the 8-episode limited series. And I was so nervous. And, I said, I'll never forget it. I said, listen, Mr. Morris, I know that a lot of people are doing this biography or that with Frederick. And he said, I want all the stories to be told about Frederick that can be told. Because if one thing chaps me, it's that we say, oh, Roger, did you see The Black Show that came out in 2018? It was The Black Show. It was in February, and it was that's it. We don't understand. Even Frederick can be told from so many different ways. My story, your story can be told from, Huey behind you can be told from so many different ways. We have so many stories to tell that I'd rather us just get down to business and get focused on getting all these stories told. There's a lot of work to do. Without expectation of, listen, awards are great, but one of the things I admire about you, Roger, is you haven't crafted a career aimed at that, which you certainly could have, but it's about the work, doing the work, telling the important stories. So the performance of Blackness and Whiteness and seeing ourselves, it's our responsibility, and we have to get to work doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Paul, that I said that, and I do remember saying that I want all the stories told, but not all of them, because if you can imagine, we've been approached. I'm 58 years old now.
Yes, you actually.
So we've had a lot of crazy things that have come across our desk to read. So let me rephrase that and say the good stories, the powerful stories, the stories that lift up his life and legacy and his contributions. Roger, when you're talking about seeing yourself as a boy in these figures, these historical figures, for me, it really was the opposite. And I'm a product of, public education here in the United States. And even though I descend from these great American heroes, and notice I said American heroes, I didn't say Black American heroes because they don't need any further qualification. But I remember being in school and, Frederick Douglass would be a chapter, maybe, or a couple of paragraphs, but we were given the safe Frederick Douglass. We were given the grandfatherly prophet, a prophetic figure that's looking away from the camera, who's not threatening, not that abolitionist, as I said earlier, that's looking directly in the camera and saying, I'm a man, and you need to recognize that. And so, the system of white supremacy in our country and how people of Native American descent and African descent have been placed in inferior positions, and we've been given these founding fathers as these white, heroes that we should venerate up on pedestals. And we're not given even the full story of Frederick Douglass or the full story of Martin Luther King or the full story of any of, the people of African descent that have contributed to our country and whose backs this country was built upon. I'm not an actor these days. I started out my first career as a singer and had my equity card for a short time until I decided I was going to go into business for myself, and then started our nonprofit organization in 2007. So we're a little over 13 years of doing work around human trafficking prevention, education in classrooms, and work on racial equity at our headquarters in the city of Rochester, which, by the way, was Frederick and Anna's adopted hometown. They spent 25 years in Rochester. Frederick published the North Star newspaper there, which was the leading abolitionist voice. And then he and Anna chose to be buried at Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester. So that's a very important city to the family of Frederick and Anna Murray Douglass. But, you know, just back to this idea of being given these people in history that I couldn't see myself in those people. And even though I had this, you know, incredible lineage, it would take a long time, well into my 20s, before I really started to connect and really understand the true history of this country, not the whitewashed, sanitized version that we've been given.
Yeah, I mean, I got to just throw in I've been reading some of Frederick's speeches that he gave in Cork. And one of them I recorded for you, Caroline, so I guess you're going to use it in something, where he said, when he was a child and sold off to a certain family, the mother of the family told her son, you know, if you get upset, you go ahead and just whip little Freddie. So a little boy, Tommy, was told by his mother, if you have any problems, you know, work out your aggressions, just go whip little Freddie. That'll get out of your system. And Frederick writes, it took me a minute, but I soon realized I had just as much right to kick Tommy as Tommy had to kick me. And it only took that one time, and then Tommy wasn't doing that anymore. Frederick told stories often about how, as he got older, there were friends of his who, you know, just were, if they were hit or beaten, they would run or kowtow or get into the middle of the river and hope they could just stand there. And Frederick said, they didn't mess with me like that, because we were going to go down till it was, you know, they didn't raise their hand on me like that. And we don't see, like you said, Ken, we don't read or hear about that part unless you go and seek it out for yourself.
Yeah, that's his self-liberation. He was on his way to self-liberating himself, which he would eventually do. So yeah, we don't get those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so important that we do, and to get more of a full picture and more importantly, that we get that early picture of who he was as this young radical who was, as we would say, causing some good trouble. The late John Lewis, but and I just wonder, like, following up on these historical figure conversations where whether or not you see yourself, you know, reflected in Douglass's story or history's story, how do you, particularly maybe for Roger and Paul, you know, how do you take someone as giant as Douglass and make it personal, so you're playing one man in time in a particular story, rather than, you know, I find that successful stories, theatrical or film stories of Douglass, really drop him into conflict, drop him into a specific location and time, rather than, you know, a history book report. So how do you separate writing a general history of Douglass and really getting into, well, what made him tick, what made him wake up every day and get going? You know, what did he love? What was his favorite smells? And, you know, like the things that we as theater makers really get into when we're playing a fictional character. How do you do that with a historical character when there's so many people have expectations of what he might be? And so either Roger or Paul first, if you want to talk about sort of getting into that personalized version of Douglass.
Roger.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Douglass has lent us such indelible imagery. There's a brief little thing that he wrote about pumpkin seeds. We raised a nice lot of pumpkins this season in our own garden. Some of them were very large, deliciously sweet, as yellow as the gold of California. It does us good to look upon these pumpkins and then to partake of them with our dear little ones. But it is not so much the good quality of the pumpkins to which we would call attention as to the great moral that we have extracted from them. You see, the ground was prepared and the seed was sown and the plant was cultivated by our own colored hands. And although the soil was American, it yielded a generous return for our industry. And from this we infer that the earth has no prejudice against color and owns all the sons and daughters of men and women as its own dear children. Come on, y'all. You can learn wisdom and goodness from our Mother Earth. You see, so this is the gift that Douglass continues to give us. We see him at that table with his children, eating those pumpkins, enjoying them. But he reminds us where the pumpkins come from and what they symbolize to him. This, you see, is how we humanize a greater, figure than we could ever imagine. The cues are there.
Yeah.
They're all there.
That's so great.
The narrative is there.
Even just your connection there makes me think of the building the tower with the window to look out on his life, of like, building a character that always is remembering where he's from, and always remembering, like what you just said, of our black hands built, harvested these seeds and made this. Of he's not only just a caretaker, he's passionately affected by his life.
Yeah.
You just gave me something, Roger. We're gonna have to talk after this, because this is what is needed. And I guess, Rex, you know this too. I'll look forward to digging into your work. But what Roger's talking about is finding actually the commonality, the humanity in the person. And then so when you then find yourself trying to create something out of nothing in a manner of speaking, for instance, his trip to Ireland, a lot of it, you can find his letters to Garrison. But Frederick was the original social media influencer. He knew those letters were going to be read. He knew what he was writing to Garrison was going to be published. So, as I'm trying to create I even told Ken this. I said, listen, I'm going to take some big swings. I'm going to take some big artistic swings, because I think that there are a lot of letters to be discovered from his time in Ireland. But, trying to figure out his day-to-day and what the man was doing, he didn't write all of those things down. So you have to glean it from some of the things, like what Roger, and I wasn't thinking about that. I need to get back into the autobiography and get into the heart of the man if I'm going to fictionalize or imagine. There's imagined dialogue that I have to come up with, that we have to come up with. And I'm not afraid of that or anything, but I have to remind myself that it can't come from the letters that we have from Ireland or from what this historian or that historian says. I have to use my instinct too. And what you glean from how someone speaks about pumpkin seeds.
So the freedom that Douglass sought, right, I think is the same freedom that we must seek as artists.
Right.
To allow ourselves to engage the imaginative process, right, while addressing the same issues that Mr. Douglass addressed 2 centuries ago, because those things are not resolved. As we speak presently, there's something else going on in Washington, D.C., right, Rex? Something else went on in Washington, D.C. on January 6th of this year, which has a lot to do with what Mr. Douglass was talking about 2 centuries ago.
Yeah, all too unfortunately relevant. But I wonder if, in just a moment, Roger, we'd love to ask you to share some more of your performance selection, which maybe we'll get a more of a different sample rather than just talking about how to make this your own. We'll get to hear you perform a piece of your own. As you get ready for that, I'm just going to ask a question from the audience that we won't have to answer right now, but maybe we can all be thinking about both during Roger's performance and then afterwards, which is, can you speak to the concept of othering and how an actor or a production can acknowledge historically entrenched concepts of difference without perpetrating stereotypes or the tired concepts within Hollywood cinematic slave narratives genre, which is often hard to separate from when you're dealing with Douglass because he was enslaved. I remember, Ken, when you visited our production of the Frederick Douglass Project here in Washington, one of the characters, one of the white characters was written as just, I was like, this is a little stereotypical, sort of like mean, racist, and just sort of over the top. And Ken, you said, those people existed. Like some people just truly flat out hated Douglass because he was Black. And, as you're like, well, yes, of course, we have to acknowledge that as well. And how do you paint with broad strokes and nuances in the same portrait, I guess. So all of that, Roger, off you go. No, but maybe that's something we can discuss after your performance of how to avoid othering and avoid harmful stereotypes in bringing to life, particularly people who were enslaved.
And Roger, maybe you could tell us just a little bit about the clip or the kind of section that you're going to perform. Sort of maybe just introduce us a little bit, like where are we meeting Frederick? Where are we kicking in? And maybe you can just give us like a few lines, just like where are we meeting Frederick?
Why don't we meet him in Belfast? In the Victoria Hotel. New Year's Day, good song by U2, 1846. A letter to William Lloyd Garrison. In thinking of America, I sometimes find myself admiring her bright blue sky, grand old woods, fertile fields, her beautiful rivers, stark round mountains. But my rapture is soon checked, and my joy is soon turned to mourning when I remember that all of America is cursed with the infernal spirit of slaveholding, robbery, and wrong. When I remember that with the waters of her noblest rivers, the tears of my brethren are washed to the ocean and disregarded, and that her most fertile fields drink daily of the warm blood of my outraged sisters, I am filled with unutterable loathing and led to reproach myself that anything could fall from my lips in praise of such a land. America will not allow her children to love her. She is bent on compelling those who would be her warmest friends to be her worst enemies. Now let's cross the Atlantic. 1857. My brothers and sisters, I'm sure that you've heard by now that your humble speaker has been branded as an ingrate because he's ventured to stand up on his own right and to plead our common cause as a Black man. rather than as an abolitionist puppet. But I hold it to be no part of gratitude to allow our white friends to do all the work while we merely hold their coats. Let me give you a little word of my philosophy. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are those who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Now, this struggle, it may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did. It never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be heaped upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed precisely by the endurance of those whom they oppress. And in light of these ideas, Black folks will be oppressed in the North as well as in the South, so long as we submit to these devilish outrages and make no resistance, either moral or physical. Men may not get all they pay for in this world, but they must certainly pay for all they get. And if we are ever to get free from the oppressions and wrongs which will be heaped upon us, we must pay for their removal. We must do this by suffering, by sacrifice, and if needs be, by our lives and the lives of others. Remember, my brothers, my sisters, who would be free themselves must strike the blow. Right, Huey?
Oh, it's so powerful, and it drops me right back to what I was, that question of, like, you know, the first thing I noticed from that, Roger, is how, speaking of how do you make history personal, you portray him with such, your character of Douglass with such vulnerability, a person who really has gone through trauma. And I think we forget that when we read him in history books. We forget, you know, we do, as Ken was talking earlier, we see the elder statesman and we think these historical figures are impervious and sort of above it all. But with that portrayal, it's with such sensitivity, you really get a feeling of a man lived through this. And that's just beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
It's a man who has scars on his back.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, you know, you're talking about this earlier, you know, performing this humanity, bringing up these stories, you know, and I'm in awe, you know, the vulnerability you show, the humanness, you know. Paul, I think you were saying this earlier about, you know, finding the humanity, finding the human, you know, and I'm just so incredibly touched by this, and I wonder, Ken and Paul, like, how do you feel, like, because you're both so close to Douglass and in different ways, but like, maybe you can give us just a few words about your sort of immediate reaction to this.
Well, if I may say, you know, people ask me all the time, if you were to meet your great-great-great-grandfather, what would you say to him? What would you ask him? And I remember I was asked that in front of a room full of historians, many of whom were Douglass scholars. And my response was, I would go up to him, I would hug him, I would tell him I love him, and I would tell him how proud I am and thank him for all of the sacrifices that he made for our country. for the world and for our family. And Roger, hearing that performance, watching your performance and the vulnerability, and I'm struck by how his words are still so relevant today to our challenges and our struggle. And I feel like I am meeting my ancestor. When you talk about the vulnerability, when we were working on our book, Picturing Frederick Douglass, which I contributed afterward to, I was struck, I was looking through the photographs. At the time, there were 160 distinct images for that first book that was published. And since we found 8 more that came out in our second edition. But as I was writing about the photographs and how I was receiving them, there was a third photograph of him. His first photograph was taken when he was about 22 years old. And then I was struck by the third photograph because he was not looking into the camera. He was looking away, he was looking down. And I saw vulnerability in that photo and in him for the first time, because I had always held him up as this like super hero figure. And it struck me when I was looking at that photograph that he had been enslaved for 20 years and he had endured brutal beatings for many of those years. And he escapes, and there was no plan for emancipation. You just had to find your way on your own if you had been enslaved. So 4 million people in 1865 were freed with no plan. Many of them spent, the first couple years just trying to reconnect with family. There was no counseling. There was no post-traumatic stress disorder designation. And this young man who had endured that brutality and inhumanity for all of those years, it didn't make him bitter in the sense that he wasn't going to help his brethren that were still toiling away in chains, but he would work toward the emancipation of everybody, and he would be a early fighter for women's rights and women's suffrage. And so, Roger, thank you very much for that performance. I don't even like calling it a performance because it's coming from your soul and your heart, and the spirit of Frederick Douglass is clearly inside of you as it is in all of us.
Ditto. I mean, there's not much to say, right? I mean, that it was said. I guess selfishly, I will say that and Ken's right, not a performance, but I guess I would call it an expression, an offering. I will selfishly say that as I'm digging into Ireland, what Roger just did reminded me there's a before and an after that can be very useful in trying to create this project in Ireland. Everybody comes from somewhere and everybody ends up somewhere. And I thought, yeah, there's just work to be done. And I thank you for reminding me of that, my fellow artists. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for all of this.
If I could piggyback on that real quick, it's just something that Kenneth said to our writers for when we were doing the Frederick Douglass project at Solus Nua is, Ken, you said something about Douglass went to Ireland as an abolitionist, and he came home as a human rights advocate because he went during the famine and saw such oppression in Ireland that looked different from oppression at home, but realized that there is a bigger cause, and there's more reason for advocacy and allyship, and like what a powerful evolution and process that he was going through during his time in Ireland as well.
Yeah, Ireland transformed his life. He was the man that he became and was because of his time in Ireland and seeing the suffering during the Great Famine, and his connection to the great liberator, Daniel O'Connell, and understanding from really an internationalist mindset that he would need to fight for human rights for everybody, not just his people. And so I think this is why you see when he does return back to the United States, and he is the only man to speak at the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, Women's Rights Convention, and he argues in favor of inserting a women's suffrage resolution into the Declaration of Sentiments. And he was one of 32 men that signed that. I'm proud of him for a lot of things, but I think I'm most proud of his lifelong support for human rights for everybody.
That was something that I was just thinking about, actually, Ken, when you were talking. And first of all, I just want to pass on a comment from the audience before I ask my own question, that people are really, really touched by your performance, Roger, and by your words, and that it's incredibly deep and very meaningful to them. So I just want to pass that on to you. And I feel the same way. And Ken, when I was when you were speaking there, I was thinking about how Frederick Douglass was, someone who supported women's rights, who was a really, like you said, he fought for women's rights, and he was very passionate about it. And I was thinking about sort of representation of women. I was thinking about strong Black women and sort of kind of thinking about stage and screen representation. As you know, I've done some work on that, and I'm always looking, at the strong women next to the strong men. And I was thinking, the other day I was reading the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative report. There was a new one, sort of talking more so about the Hollywood ecosystem. But I was still struck about how we've long seen this desire to play strong Black female artists on stage, not just in America but internationally. And I feel like there's a generally kind of an understanding that we're doing better, but we're not quite there yet. And I was thinking, I came across this project. It's called the F-Rated Project. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was started by UK a group of female filmmakers or film festival employees, I think, in the UK. And it's sort of a rating system that is developed to highlight women on stage, on screen, and behind the camera as well. And in that context, Ken, I was thinking specifically, about Anna Douglass. And I was thinking, about screen representation, like, the female characters in Black Panther, or Casey Lemon's Harriet Tubman, or more recently, you might have seen the Nella Larson's Passing adaptation by Rebecca Hall. So I kind of was wondering, Ken, about, sort of highlighting maybe Anna Douglass more, maybe in the family narrative or stage, screen, but also I was wondering, Roger and Paul as well, sort of what changes have you seen in this kind of narrative, and have you noticed sort of ways to highlight, Black women, especially in that? Has there anything changed, and how do you feel about this?
Well, I'm always happy to talk about my great-great-great-grandmother, Anna Murray Douglass, who is an important person in this story, because there would be no Frederick Douglass without Anna Murray Douglass, and that's just a fact. They met while he was enslaved in Baltimore. She was the first person in her family to be born free. They meet, they start thinking about a life together, and she's one of the first people, in addition to the Irish men on the docks, that planted the seed of thought in Frederick's mind that you're not meant to be a slave for life. And as they're starting to think about a family together, she said, I don't want our children's father to be a slave. Had she not sold her personal belongings to help finance his escape, had she not sewn the sailor's disguise that he would wear, who knows if he would have had the courage or the wherewithal to even escape. And had we not had his contributions, we'd be a very different country or world sitting here. Historians, mostly male white historians, have pushed Anna to the side. She never learned to read and write. And it has been intimated that how could this great man, this articulate man, Frederick Douglass, be with a woman like that, a woman that he was married to for 44 years, had 5 children together with, and 21 grandchildren, as if she didn't bring something to the party, and people would talk about, well, Frederick never talked about Anna. Well, I don't think back then you really talked about your personal life a whole lot. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Anna said, Frederick, if you say anything about me or this family, you're going to have to answer to me when you come home. So we've been working very hard over the past several years to lift up her life and legacy. And I'm proud to say that in 2018, the school that sits on the site where the Frederick Douglass home once sat before it was burned down by arson was renamed the Anna Murray Douglass Academy. In addition to Paul's project, I'm also working on a couple of other projects, a limited TV series with Charles Randolph Wright And Anna is a character in there that obviously is very strong, the strong woman that she was. I'm also working on a feature film, which we've been working on for more than 5 years, that in the past several months, we've made some incredible progress, and there'll be something to announce on that pretty soon. I don't want to get ahead of myself before I dive into the details on that, but let's just say that Anna will be featured in a big way. She's a big part of the story. One of the greatest gifts, as my friend scholar David Blight says, the greatest gift that Frederick Douglass has given us is his story. And we intend to make sure that we tell that story, and the story of Anna Murray Douglass too, and the Douglass family, because there were children and grandchildren that also assisted in this work. It wasn't just him.
Thank you, Ken. I'm so delighted to hear this. I cannot wait. I'd love to continue that conversation after we've seen the final product. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Paul, I saw you were very enthusiastic about that too. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, you know, in regard specifically to the project I'm working on, I will admit my first thought was, I'm going to focus specifically on Frederick being in Ireland, and there may not be much room for Anna as a character. But I found out in the very first episode, oh, wait a minute, kind of what Ken was saying, but I just found out as I was going, I said, well, he couldn't even do that if it wasn't for her. Okay, wait a minute. So she appears now intermittently. I do stay in the time frame of Ireland, but Anna Murray Douglass deserves her own eight episode limited series. You just have to dig in and do the work. Unfortunately, it is much harder for us Black Americans to find the information because a lot of it was taken away, not written down, when you get before a certain period. So some of it is based on instinct or based on oral traditions. But yeah, I just feel like Anna deserves her own. Just like what Ken said, I don't want all the projects on Frederick, just the good ones. Anna deserves more than one project on her and the children.
Thank you.
And I want to tag on, this isn't necessarily about Black women, but with Frederick speaking at Seneca Falls and his tireless advocacy for women's rights. As Ken intimated, a lot of who he came back to America as was based on what happened in Ireland. And a lot of what happened in Ireland was not only the great Daniel O'Connell that he met, but the politically active women, Rebecca Fisher, Susanna Fisher, Isabel Jenkins, Mary McCracken, Hannah Webb, all of these women who were very, not just active, but savvy. And I think he saw that, Isabel Jenkins was running his speeches and book sales in Cork. She sort of just took over as a manager of his comings and goings and organizing all the speeches. And he saw that. So I think it obviously had a big effect on him.
We have a great comment from Mark Grian, who says, can we invest in these movies, TV shows, limited series to bring them to the screen? This could be our Bitcoin. Can't wait to watch them all. We got to get Paul's email out to everybody to like, hey, and Rogers. And I'm like,
my number is 555.
Yeah. Venmo him.
Ken, I'm already thinking about Roger in episode 8 anyway. I don't know if that's going through my mind right now. Okay. We'll talk about it, Roger.
Yeah, Roger, I'm interested in your perspective on this too, because I know you have daughters, and I'm wondering, like, how do you feel about sort of the representation, because you have the stage and the screen experience as well, and what have you noticed? What have you seen? What do you see? Because Douglass very intimately through your beautiful performances, and I'm just wondering about sort of your perspective on this as well before we move on.
Well, I don't know where we're moving to, but I know where we've been, and the conversation has been so stimulating. Again, happy to be with you. The idea of Anna Murray Douglass, I think we have to go, Paul, to that imaginative space of nothing. Frederick Douglass is a 27-year-old rock star who is on the road. He has left his wife behind with 4 children at that time. Mm-hmm. I think that the lack of a record of communication, of course, has to do with literacy. We know that they communicated by his elder daughter, who read the letters and then transcribed letters back. We also have to have in regard the notion of security. Security. They had within their household a woman adopted, Harriet, who was an enslaved woman who could be re-enslaved at any given moment. We have a family that is involved in the Underground Railroad, that is spiriting people to freedom through Massachusetts and then eventually through Rochester, New York. So there are a lot of elements here that we can work with imaginatively to create this very obviously important relationship. And Ken, I must say that one of the great renditions of Douglass's 4th of July speech was rendered by your young relatives. I believe your nephew and nieces.
Nephews and cousins, yeah.
And cousins were just so brilliant in bringing Douglass forward into our present moment and giving us a glimmer of hope, whereby our next generation of scholars, artists, workers, organizers, laborers have been, inundated by this great light of Frederick and Anna. That was extraordinary. And I saw you dressed up as Frederick Douglass too. They put a wig on.
that was a whole, that was really an interesting experience.
But as you say, there have been so many Douglasses, and I've known a lot of them. At least I made a list last night of at least 20 of them. The great William Marshall, who was a mentor of mine, who's known best as Blackula, a black kind of Dracula, who was actually an abolitionist. He played Frederick Douglass. Roscoe Lee Brown played Frederick Douglass a couple of times. Arthur Burghardt, Donald O'Kelly, an Irishman, who wrote a play called The Cambria about Douglass's journey to Ireland. Donald and I did a 2-hander in New York City, where he actually played Frederick Douglass. He's a white Irish man, and he did it beautifully. Don Cheadle, of course, did a crazy Douglass. Morgan Freeman has read Douglass. James Earl Jones has read Douglass. Danny Glover has read Douglass. Ossie Davis recorded Douglass. Raymond St. Jacques played Douglass in Glory. There's a million Douglasses out there, and there's a million more to come. And there are different approaches, which, as you suggest, Ken, are not all the right approaches, but there are definitely a variety of ways of approaching this fantastically huge and inspiring story.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for mentioning the next generation of Douglass descendants, because I was so proud of them. And I have 2 daughters that are 25 and 22. And I actually was supposed to be in that I recorded my section for it, but when we came down to the editing, I wound up on the cutting room floor because it was just so much powerful just having the younger Descendants. But I will say that I had an opportunity for the first time to sit down for an interview for a Douglass documentary that'll be on HBO with my daughters. And it was the first time we had ever done anything together. And I was so proud of them and how much, I was nervous. I wasn't really sure, how much they had learned, but through osmosis, they had learned a lot, and they really represented the family in a way that, as you said, Roger, it gives us hope that there's next generation of not only my family, but all of our families, because we all descend from greatness and we all stand on the shoulders and walk in the shoes of those that came before us. So it's something that we all should be proud of.
I think that that message, Ken and Roger and Paul, is really well received by the audience. I just want to share a few comments with you here, because especially Ken, when you're talking about the inspiration and when you guys were talking about the hope and the, the impression and the deep feeling of gratitude from this panel, but also for the audience. And I just want to share with you that Maureen, who is in Cork, she is a US Irish citizen living in Cork, Ireland. She says that deep gratitude for such beautiful and humane offering, a gift to us all, so important in our own historical moment. And then we have a comment from Junior, also in Cork. He says, Frederick was the embodiment of true expression and freedom. He was remarkable then and inspiring now. And he has lit a fire in young migrants in Cork. And how can we share his history in Africa? So that is one of the questions I wanted to share with you. And then there's another one, while we talk about, hope and joy and moving forward in our next generations. There's a question here from Rose who asks, and she says that historical Black stories on screen often revolve around adversity. And she asks, and when developing historical and contemporary stories that have Black protagonists, do you aim to portray Black joy and love equally, or sort of more than Black adversity? So maybe we can talk a little bit more about this, inspiration, this motivation, this like deep feeling of gratitude, and the continued relevance, the continuation of Frederick Douglass's legacy here, abroad and everywhere. And maybe we can pick up on that kind of thought.
Well, Douglass went from Maryland disguised as a sailor up the Chesapeake Bay to Philadelphia, and then he went to New York and got married because Anna came and met him there, and then they eventually went to Massachusetts and wound up eventually in Rochester, New York, and he went to Ireland, and he went to England, and he went to Scotland, and then he came back, and then he went back, and then he came back. And this man was always on the move. He was a migrant. He was always seeking safety, he was seeking security, and he was seeking the opportunity to inspire people along the way. Frederick Douglass's work was not simply for self-liberation. He was about the liberation of a community, of a nation. And it wasn't just a Black community or a Black nation. He was about educating the entire world about justice, equal rights. In fact, he became an advocate of temperance when he went to Ireland, because he saw, what alcohol was doing to people and how alcohol was used as an exploitative poison. And I must say that this story becomes oh so complicated after Douglass comes back, having been, lauded in Ireland. And then during the Civil War, is greatly disappointed in the Irish and the Irish American community, particularly in New York City during the draft riots in July of 1863, in which there was a riot against the draft, but the rioters rioted against Black people and the allies of Black people, and murdered women in their homes and burnt their homes over their heads, dashed out the brains of young children against the lampposts. So what he thought had perhaps been achieved, during those sojourns, dismantled during particularly these draft riots in 1863. So his relationship with Ireland becomes very complicated. Father Matthew, I believe it was, with whom he took the temperance pledge in Ireland,
Right over here.
Came to America. And he did not acknowledge the anti-slavery movement when he came to America. Again, a great disappointment to Douglass. Mm-hmm. And let's also know that when Douglass came to Ireland, he was under surveillance. Okay? There were people who were watching him on all sides of the political fence, including the abolitionist establishment. So when he says, "I've never felt so free, the great gray fog of the Emerald Isle," you got to take all of that with a little pinch of salt and some fatback, right? Because he's under pressure to be a diplomat, you see? So to express himself in the same way that I saw our sisters and our brothers express themselves yesterday as part of this Douglass Week, who were talking about the reconciliation of Blackness and Irishness. I think that he would probably have a lot to say about that were he not under pressure to be the ultimate diplomat.
Yeah, there's a lot of, that's such a great point between the cross-cultural connection, particularly as well when the Irish immigrated to the United States and realized, maybe as Douglass had said at his time in Ireland, I'm experiencing the absence of prejudice here. But when the Irish came to the United States, there's a real reckoning to happen with their relationship with slavery and racism, of like maybe that it's very easy to say, oh, when Douglass was here in Ireland, we weren't racist. But the Irish realizing in the United States, oh, I can get a step ahead because I am white. And I can get a leg up on other immigrants. And there's I think a real reckoning for Irish American companies to struggle with that and to come to terms with that in the stories we tell, in the art we produce as well. And on the flip side of that, I just wondered, how do you also center Black joy and positivity in your work and your stories? I think one thing for myself as someone who's trying to work at this intersection of the Irish and Douglass and other cultures is being aware of not only telling stories of trauma, but telling stories of celebration, of inspiration, because being aware of, if your audience is primarily white, if we're an Irish, for instance, an Irish organization, then what's your authority you don't want to exploit a story of Black trauma, I guess that's what I'm saying.
Well, it doesn't even have to be joy at all times. You know what, Ken and Roger, I'm pretty certain y'all aren't always joyful 24 hours. It doesn't have to be that. It just has to be complicated. We're complicated people just like everyone else. So stories of, like when Roger was describing, when he was recounting that period in Frederick's life just a moment ago, I was like, yeah, there's adversity in there and there's adventure in there. And you know, we have great stories of, sure, adversity doesn't have to be trauma. You know, overcoming the obstacle and the adventure of it is the complicated story we want to tell of our lives.
And for me, it's just very simple. It's just telling the story of Black excellence.
Yeah.
You know, just even in Frederick Douglass's own life and his love of music, and how he taught my great-grandfather Joseph, his grandson, how to play the violin, and Joseph becomes a concert violinist playing all over the world, and the first Black classical recording artist for the Victor Talking Machine Company. These are not stories that we hear, and certainly they're not stories that white America really knows about Black excellence. So that's what it's about for me.
Mm-hmm. Revealing, it's the revelation of revealing the truth. There's nothing that needs to be created. It's there.
Well, there is lots that needs to be created, Paul.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean.
Lots has been created, and while you were talking, I was thinking about, you know, sort of the direction our conversation was going about, you know, music and expression, and you know, this kind of controversy inside of Douglass, perhaps, and inside of many of us, you know, on the outside and on the inside. You know, what do we show on the outside? What do we have in the inside? What do we feel? And I think that you know, Ken, you mentioned this earlier with the photography, and you know, the way Fred Douglass portrayed himself in all of these pictures, and how important it was to him to portray himself in a certain way. And I believe this is a good segue, Paul, to maybe showcase some of your most recent work, which we are dying to hear. And I would like to invite you, Paul, to maybe say a few words. We're gonna play two songs, world premiere of the song Outside and the song Fire in My Eyes. And Paul, maybe you can introduce Outside first, and we'll play it. We have a beautiful video with that, and we'll come back, and then we'll introduce A Fire in My Eyes.
Great. You've actually said a lot about Outside. It's about the duality that Black people have dealt with in our 400 plus years in this country and beyond. We've employed it since we were stolen and brought here. And Frederick Douglass, I felt, was a master code switcher. And Roger put it in a way that I hadn't heard before. He was the most under pressure diplomat. Is that what you said, Roger? That's the kind of the way you put it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he was under a diplomatic pressure when he was in Ireland. You know?
But as you mentioned, that probably wasn't the whole story of what was going on inside of him. So this song is loosely based on Frederick, but it's about all Black men and Black women and Black people generally in Western culture who have to code switch, and the concern we have about what we're showing on the outside and what we're showing on the inside. This quickly made video was shot at the Imperial Hotel here in Cork just a few days ago, where Frederick stayed.
And bear with me, I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going to turn off my camera and I'm going to share my screen, and I hope you can all see and listen. So enjoy. This is Outside by Paul Oakley Stovall.
And Nikhil Sabu.
And Nikhil Sabu.
Caroline, I think you might need to go back and share sound. It might, I hope it's not just me, but I don't think this sound is coming through.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me double check this. I was worried about that. Let me just try one more time. Should share the sound. Give me one more second. I'll go back. Sorry about this. This is bound to happen.
Mhm.
So give me one more second and we should be ready to go now. Let me see. We'll try one more time. All right.
You got it. That's it.
Okay, here we go, guys.
So much laughter all around me, and I don't let myself smile. So many miles I've covered, but I don't let myself rest. No time for that. More letters to write, more speeches to give, more truths to tell, and all the while I wonder. More people to meet, more tasks to complete, more freedom to seek, and all the while I wonder. Do I look serious? Do I seem studious? Do I feel petrified on the inside? Do I look impervious? Do I come off joyful? Do I act satisfied on the outside? So much static interfering, but I try not to lose my way. So many voices want a hearing, not enough hours in the day. More places to see, new feelings that swell, more nightmares to quell, and all the while I wonder. More opinions to give, more life to live, more tears not to shed, and all the while I wonder. Do I look serious? Do I seem studious? Do I feel petrified on the inside? Oh, do I look impervious? Do I come on joyful? Do I act satisfied on the outside? On the outside. On the outside.
And I apologize if the sound wasn't the greatest. We tried our best. I'm very sorry. I hope that you could hear it. It was blasting loud in my room. So my house was filled with Paul and Nikhil, and it was amazing. I felt I was live in a live concert. I hope you could hear it. Blown away, as always. But I hand the word over to you.
Oh, to me?
To whoever wants to go next and talk about this. Roger, Ken, Rex, Paul.
Paul, congratulations in advance of what I know will be a compelling piece of work. I know you're just getting started with this, right? And I loved your appropriation of space in, historical structure. I think that, that's something that we can do cinematically that we can't necessarily do on stage, because what we do on stage is an invented design, and to go to the source is a particularly rich experience when you can go right there to the spot. And I think that this is a piece that is working in silence as well as sound. And thanks.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will also
sorry,
echo that and say congratulations. And, I know the work that you've been doing over there with the music, and I've been seeing you in my Google feeds just about every single day from the Irish publications that have been covering what you've been doing. But yeah, the song is beautiful. I can't wait to actually really hear it with the great sound system. It's a little difficult to be able to get the full essence of what it is over Zoom, but it just sounds beautiful, and I look forward to hearing it. And I understand you've got some other projects that you're working on as well, some other musical numbers.
Yes. Shall I just move right into it, Caroline?
Yeah, can I just say, I just love how evocative it is. It shows that inner life of what you're you or Douglas might be experiencing of presenting one face and feeling so many other things inside. And it's so good when you've probably no doubt have heard the saying in musical theater, you talk and then you sing when you can't talk anymore. And then you dance when you can't sing anymore. And like your piece had all of those in that. It had such great movement when even the music couldn't contain yourself anymore, and you had to fall on the floor and just like feel these huge, swelling emotions. So congrats. I just can't wait to see and hear more.
Thank you. Thank you.
On that note, I was going to say, questions are coming in from the audience. We will share this, and so that you are able to listen to this like I just did in full loud volume, and we'll share this, of course, once Paul has made this a public song and video. And Paul, thank you so much for sharing with us. I know you'll share a lot more with us in the next few days. And before we wrap up, I would like to sort of gently segue into the next day, because that will be full of musical performances, and tomorrow is basically our music day. And I would like to take the opportunity, Paul, now to maybe ask you to introduce us to the next song on which we will close out. And before we then say goodbye, I would like to hand over the mic one more time to you, Paul, and we'll come back after the song and say our goodbyes, okay?
Great. This song may be a little bit of a surprise to Ken. I don't know if he knows what's about to happen, but he suggested that perhaps his daughter, Nicole, who's a wonderful singer, get involved in Douglass Week. And I wrote a song that imagines his last night in Cork at the Jennings family home in their library. And Isabel Jennings, the daughter who was 32, when Frederick was here when he was 27. She's the one who sort of took over managing his speech events. And I think from what I've been gleaning, she felt the most useful in her entire life. And the night before he leaves, she's not sure what's going to be next for her. So much in the vein of when I was really touched when Roger said that he did the duo Frederick piece and the Irishman played Frederick. Nicole Morris, great, help me Ken, great granddaughter of Frederick Douglass, will now perform the role of Isabel Jennings in a duet. And I'm going to do the best I can to keep up with her singing Frederick in a song called Fire in My Eyes. So we are in Frederick's last night in Cork in the Jennings Library, and Isabel has something to say to him.
And I will share my screen one more time. I will try and set up my audio preferences a little bit different. So bear with me, I'll give it a try. And here we go. Here is Fire in My Eyes.
May I add, this technically brings Frederick to Douglass Week for real now. His bloodline is here.
Look at Nicole.
I'm just, can you see me still? Can someone take my video off, please, before I play this? Perfect. All right, here we go. And can you hear this? I'm just gonna ask you guys if you can see this.
I think it just cut out. The screen share just cut out.
Okay, but you could hear it? Can you hear it?
Yes, I heard it start, yeah.
Perfect. I'll do that again. That was the trial. There we go. Now you can see. Wonderful. And here we go.
Oh, Frederick, you're still up. It's late. Time to... Wait. I just need to say one thing. I leave tomorrow, Isabel. I gotta get my sleep. These past weeks have been great. Yes, they have. And I just want to say, Frederick, there's fire in your eyes. So I've been told. Thank you. It's always there, that fire. Well, I use it in the daytime, and I need it to see at night. Look at me. Isabel, you have it too. That fire. Tell me about the fire. That fire in my eyes is love. That fire in my eyes is enough. Enough to carry me across oceans and lead me back home. That fire in my eyes is tough. That fire in my eyes costs so much. Enough to carry me across oceans and take me back home. When the least of us is lifted up, the journey feels a little less impossible, Isabel, and it's worth the wait. I carry every day in every way in every part of me. When the least of us struggles, we all feel that pain. And if I don't keep moving forward, the struggle gets born again and again and again. I know I've seen every picture you take. Every word that you say has that fire. And I would never portray myself as someone you choose or the things you must do, Frederick. Everyone fawns over the man they think you are, the star whose light shines so bright over Ireland. And what can I say? I feel the same way. My life has changed because of your fire. That fire in your eyes is love. That fire in your eyes is enough. Enough to carry across oceans and reach you back home. That fire in my eyes brings hope. That fire in my eyes will grow to the end of forever, even when I am gone. I wonder if, I wonder who, I wonder why sometimes I do the work I do. You may not live to see the change, and that's okay. You can feel it in your bones. And now it's time to say goodbye. You know alright. You better write to me. And if we don't meet again in this life, I'm so thankful for that fire. That fire in my eyes is love. That fire in my eyes is love. Enough to carry across oceans. And take me back home. I don't know what to think, what to feel, what to do. Maybe I've said too much. I'm such a fool. Not a fool, but there's hunger in every wreck, and my work is not through. I think I might love you. Please, don't make this too hard, Isabel. Down on my knees, and I need to stand up, stand strong. What we're feeling isn't wrong, but it's all in my way, and I've got to Don't go. Let me go. This book, Lady of the Lake. Take it. It's yours. Take it. I've seen you staring it down and lighting it up with that fire in your eyes. I haven't seen this many books in a while. What is it? What is it about that one that catches your eye? It's where I got my name.
And that's Ken's daughter.
Wow, she didn't tell me anything.
I don't, me and her been talking. I said, listen, Nicole, I hope he's not even checking Twitter because we announced that we were going to do it. But I said, you know, I know she didn't play it for you.
No, she didn't. No,
I knew she would. Yeah, she's a typical 22. I knew she wasn't going to let you hear it at least.
Yeah, no, that was something else. That was beautiful. I love that groove on that. Yeah, nice performances.
That was just really perfect, guys. It was a pleasure. I have no words left to say. This was an incredible evening with all of you, Ken, Roger.
Before you shout out Ken and Roger, may I shout out Nikhil Sabu, who played all the instruments and wrote the music for both of those songs. May I shout out Hugh Clark at the Irish Institute of Music and Song, who mixed and engineered the song. We have a lot more work to do on it, but those two gentlemen are sent from above, especially Nikhil, who I've written many more songs with that you all will be hearing in the coming days.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And Nikhil, I know you guys have been working so hard and tirelessly around the clock for the last almost 3 months at this point on all of these amazing pieces. And we'll hear more tomorrow, all day tomorrow. And there's a huge musical evening planned for the evening tomorrow. Before we go and say our good nights and thank yous, it was a pleasure. I hope we continue this conversation. I think that we all know that there's a lot more to do, but it's these conversations that are so beautiful and so inspirational and motivating too. And this is what, you know, the essence of Douglass Week is about these conversations. And I'm so glad we shared this evening together. It's been a pleasure. So my deepest thanks to you, Ken, to you, Roger, to you, Paul, and Rex as well, for your very individual and very insightful and amazing contributions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
So inspiring to be with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rex.
Thanks
Thank you
all.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for Douglass Week, and we'll see you tomorrow.